and really control the agenda of Congress. And they thought they could take some of the lessons they learned without some of the worst aspects of the Tea Party and apply that to the progressive side and what we can do to pressure our members of Congress to work for a more progressive agenda. And so they did that. They posted this Indivisible guide, and within, I don't know what time period, short, days, hundreds of indivisible groups sprang up, and that's Livermore Indivisible is one of those. And our groups, our network of indivisible groups, along with other progressive organizations, helped to, for example, in 2017, we were part of the movement to help save the Affordable Care Act. We helped with the Blue Wave in 2018 and flipped the House blue, protested Trump's policies, such as the immigration policies, advocated for his first impeachment, and worked as hard as we could during the pandemic for the 2020 election cycle. And through those things, we were able to accomplish some wins with the limited power that we had. But we have to realize that Republicans and conservatives have been working hard for decades to really rig our democracy and making through voter suppression, gerrymandering, dark money, packing the courts, suppressing labor unions, and attacking the press. They've built a coalition to preserve power for the few and have reshaped our structures and the rules of our democracy in their favor, in the favor of few, because they know a truly representative democracy will reject their extreme social and economic agenda. So as a result of these policies, our democracy has withered over the past several decades, culminating with Trump's election in 2016, and then this past week, as we saw a violent coup attempt by anti-democracy extremists. We need urgently structural reforms to put power in the hands of the people. Because our current system does not respond to the will of the people. We're unable to enact reforms that have popular support, such as healthcare, climate, labor, tax, immigration, gun violence. There's a whole list, because the current system doesn't allow for that. So now with the Democratic trifecta, with Democratic control of the White House and the two houses of Congress, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of 2009, when the last time we had a Democratic trifecta. And those lessons, as laid out by the new Indivisible guide that the founders of Indivisible have just put out, what they say, we can expect in this new period, Republican obstruction and attempts to delay, expect grassroots conservative backlash, which, the people who stormed the Capitol on Wednesday aren't going away on January 20th. Expect Democrats to get cold feet when they're being, we have to put up with this obstruction and backlash from the other side. They may try to back away from some of the more progressive policies. And so we want to make sure that we hold our representatives accountable and do the right thing for the people. So this time period parallels with another point in history, and that is 1933, when there was a deep depression and rise of fascism globally. And FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was just taking office. And I'll quote from the new Indivisible guide. FDR's landslide did not by itself save America. Resisting his agenda, his opponents cried socialism. Members of his own party urged caution. The Supreme Court fought back, but grassroots advocates pushed, prodded, cajoled, incentivized, welcomed, and willed FDR's agenda into existence. Social Security, unemployment insurance, labor rights, the Fair Employment Practice Committee, rural electrification, and defeat of the fascists are not just FDR's legacy, they are the legacy of the people-powered movements that shaped the era. So with this, the Democratic trifecta, we have the power now, and we have the opportunity. And so really the time is now for us to push for a progressive agenda by the Democrats in control. I think for too long we've let Republicans and conservatives control the narrative that government is bad, and as Democrats and progressives, I think we've failed to sufficiently defend our policies and our democratic institutions. And so they have, as a result, the public has lost faith in these institutions and in our democracy itself. So we as Democrats and progressives need to show that the government can do good things for the people. And so it's up to us to make that happen. But we have to push our members of Congress to do it. They're not necessarily going to do it without our support and our persistence. So the priorities that we would like to set, and this was part of what Indivisible National has asked all of us to prioritize. First of all is, of course, a pandemic recovery package that really meets the needs of the health and economic crises that we're experiencing and have been experiencing for the past 10 months or so. But then turn with a real emphasis on democracy reform. And that would include HR 1 for the PEOPLE Act, which already passed the House in last session. It would get money out of politics, expand voting rights, combat corruption, and secure our elections. HR 4 would be another priority, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would restore full protections of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that were invalidated by the Supreme Court in 2013, and which led to a lot of voter suppression laws in various states thereafter. DC statehood is another priority. HR 51 was passed in 2019 by the House. This is something that DC residents want. They pay more in taxes than 22 other states, and they have more residents than 2 states. And really the reason it has not become a state is it's kind of a legacy of racism. It was disenfranchised after the Reconstruction because white political leaders didn't want the Black city to govern itself. So that is long overdue to make DC a state. And then structural reforms are needed as well, such as reforming the courts. At this point, Trump has appointed 1/3 of the Supreme Court justices and 25% of all federal judges. They all have lifetime appointments. And this is the culmination of a long-term conservative political strategy to make the courts an extension of the Republican Party. They're using unelected judges to enact their agenda. So we need reform. Indivisible recommends their ideal on this would be expanding the Supreme Court by at least 4 justices, expand lower courts to depoliticize the appointment process, diversify and reduce their caseloads, and impose term limits on Supreme Court justices and bolster ethics and transparency requirements. And this could all be part of a new and updated HR 1. And then on the Senate side, really to pass any kind of agenda, we will need to get rid of the filibuster. That is an arcane Senate rule that allows minority party to block legislation by requiring 60 votes instead of a simple majority. We know it will be used by McConnell and Republicans to block all reforms and progressive agenda, and it just takes a simple majority to eliminate it. So those would be our priorities, and I don't know if has Congressman Swalwell joined yet, Kyoko?
I'm here.
Oh, great. Thank you, Congressman. We're so fortunate to have you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now and wanted to welcome you, especially after the events of this week. We're really fortunate to have you with us. Congressman Swalwell has been representing our district since 2013. He currently serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Judiciary Committee. and is co-chair of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, which makes committee assignments and sets the caucus policy agenda. So Congressman, we really appreciate your time with your busy schedule today. And so I'll turn it over to you to give us your remarks.
Thank you so much, Marla. Thank you, Livermore Indivisible. I was home over the weekend. I just got back into Washington. It was nice, not just because of how great the weather was in Livermore this weekend, but it was nice to just take a long run through Livermore yesterday and process what has happened and kind of just put in perspective where we are. I'm back in Washington because I do believe that we are going to seek to impeach the president this week. And, you know, that's not something I went to Congress to do, but because of the position we're in, he is not able to defend life. We've lost 5 lives from what happened on Wednesday, and a Capitol police officer died by suicide today. So I would say 6 lives. He can't defend life, and he can't defend our democratic ideals. Now, ideally, the president would resign. That would be the best thing to do for the country. He's not going to do that. We know he's not going to do that. The next best thing would be for Vice President Pence to have the courage to invoke the 25th Amendment, and we know he's not going to do that either. And so knowing our act and knowing our scene that our founders did give us the extraordinary remedy in the House of Representatives to impeach the president, it looks like we're going to go in that direction. Of course, the Senate, that's a different ball game. They can do what they wish with it, but we are limited to our act and to our scene. And I think it would be best for us to do that immediately. Why so urgently? Well, as you saw over the weekend, or you saw over Wednesday, and what we were seeing over the weekend with new threats that are emerging, things can change in a moment. And the president Wednesday morning called on his supporters to fight for him. And within a matter of minutes, they stormed Capitol Hill. They invaded the Capitol. They ransacked relics of the Capitol. Our nation's lawmakers had to retreat from both chambers as we were undergoing the peaceful transition of power by certifying the Electoral College process. The president radicalized these terrorists and should be held accountable for that. And so we're going to do that in the coming days. Now, the next best thing that we have to do and is really important for us to do is to make sure that we show ourselves and show the world that we can carry off a peaceful transition of power on January 20 when the inauguration happens. And just like you, I've been seeing on the news and have received texts and tweets and messages from you and many of our neighbors about some of the new threats that are coming around the January 20 inauguration. So we have to make sure that it's a safe inauguration so that the public can view it, and also safe so our nation's leaders can be a part of it. I'm so glad, though, shifting away from this crisis that the president and his accomplices in Congress are a part of, we still have, the imminent concerns of COVID. And having visited our hospitals just recently and having spoken just recently to our local hospitals, they are overwhelmed. People are sitting in their cars at our local hospitals in tears because their loved ones are inside and they're not able to go in and be with them. That's the state of California's hospitals right now. On the inside, you have patients succumbing to this vicious virus, and on the outside, you have family members in the dark, in the cold, not knowing what's next for their loved one. So the best thing we can do in the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration is to make sure that we distribute this vaccination to every American, to make sure that as citizens, we all take it upon ourselves to show that care and concern for our neighbors, to make sure that we're all vaccinated, and locally to make sure that our local civic organizations, whether it's a church, a nonprofit organization, whether it's our local supermarket, that they are all able to stand up vaccination sites. And then, of course, there's the economic devastation that has occurred. And we saw that the Republicans wouldn't go for a cent more than $600 for families that need it the most. We need more than $600. We need more than $2,000. But I hope that immediately we passed additional economic stimulus relief, but also that we pass, long-term reforms that recognize the widening gap of economic inequality in our country. And because of what was exposed in Georgia, such long lines for early voting sites, because of the way that Georgians and so many Americans are discriminated against in how they go to the polls. Yes, I'm so grateful that Indivisible is endorsing HR 1, the For the People Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and I welcome some of the reforms that you put in there. I'm for expanding the Supreme Court. I'm for having independent redistricting in every single state. I'm for getting rid of the dirty money and the dirty maps that pollute our politics. So thank you so much for taking on those issues. There's a lot that we can do ahead, and I want to take some of your questions, but one other issue that has come to mind as I found myself, leaving the Capitol through an evacuation route with so many, of my colleagues terrified and having been told that we're going to have to duck under our chairs and to put a gas mask on. It's not lost on me the number of parents and students who've reached out to me and have said, I'm sorry that you went through that, but that's the everyday environment for America's children in our schools. And so I really do believe that in the first 100 days, we have to stand up and do all we can to end gun violence. And that's what motivates me to keep doing this work is to make sure our kids can be safe in their schools. So I will turn it back to you for the questions. I think you're asking to post them in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer some of them.
Yeah, so we first wanted to ask a few other questions of you, and then we'll open it up to others in the chat. So our first question, and this was, we had our list of asks, which was the passive pandemic relief package, which it sounds like you're on top of, as well as HR 1, HR 4, DC statehood, reform the courts. One question that I have is, would you be willing to join the Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, because being part of that voting bloc may help support progressive agenda easier?
Yeah, sure. I'm absolutely willing to join. The reason I've not been a part of it in the past is because I founded a caucus of my own called the Future Forum, and that's been an organization that has constituted our youngest members. And so I thought, put all my effort into that. I grew it from just a dozen members back in 2015 to today. It has over 50 members in our 40s and under. It's the most diverse caucus, and it's the youngest caucus in the Congress. But ideologically, I am a progressive. It was just a matter of bandwidth for me. So as I start to age out and move out of Future Forum, I just turned 40 this year. Absolutely, I'm open to doing that.
Great. I think that would be good. We would really support that. A few other questions that the steering committee kicked around before this that we'll go through, and then we'll look at questions in the chat box. How do you anticipate working with the Biden administration to rebuild confidence in our democracy and to make progress on people's issues such as healthcare, jobs, environment, and equity?
Yeah, I really do believe that we have to meet the American people where they are on healthcare, on the environment, on gun safety. There's wide consensus that we need to have healthcare for all in this country. There's wide consensus that we need to have dramatic changes that address climate change. There's wide consensus that we need to have background checks and an assault weapons ban. And of course, I was the first member of Congress to call for an assault weapons ban and a buyback of every assault weapon in America. And so we in the Congress, I think, need to have the confidence that if we meet the American people where they are, they will join us. But on democratic reforms, I hope that because of my role in prosecuting the case against Trump over the last 4 years, that would suit me to be a part of an effort to look at what Donald Trump and his team did to expose our vulnerabilities in our country and have some sort of truth and reconciliation process into Congress to make sure that no egregious behavior like this ever happens again.
That's good. That sounds good. How do you anticipate working with your Republican colleagues to pass legislation, or do any of these other, Truth and Reconciliation Commission or something like that?
Well, first I have to say, we have a coup caucus right now of about 140 Republicans. And they are calling for us to unite and heal. And I want to unite and heal. I know the country wants to unite and heal, but we're going to unite against them. Republicans and Democrats in America are going to unite against the people who radicalized the terrorists who attacked our Capitol. Now, there are Republicans who are not a part of that, and we should do all we can to work with them. But I also believe you have to separate them from those who betrayed their country. There were 44 members of Congress on the vote we had 2 weeks ago, 44 Republicans who voted for the $2,000 stimulus check. And if you look at those are the ones that are most likely, collaborators who we can work with. But I really do believe right now we need to make sure every American knows, who was with America on Wednesday and who was with, the Trump party, where they took down the American flag and they waved the Trump "Make America Great Again" flag over the Capitol.
Yeah, totally agree with that. How do you, switching gears just a little bit, but also it came up from the scenes that we witnessed on Wednesday, contrasting those with what we saw last summer in some of the protests. How do you plan to address and overcome equity issues and law enforcement responses? People of color have never been treated equally, but what we witnessed the last few months and then this last week is unacceptable. Peaceful protesters are treated like criminals, while mobs storming the Capitol are left to casually walk away from their violent insurrection.
It was really disheartening to see a scene on Wednesday that did not look like the Capitol over the summer when people were rightfully and righteously, peacefully assembling in response to the murder of George Floyd. But the Capitol had its steps and monuments around it lined with National Guardsmen. For Black Americans, as one of my colleagues, Cori Bush, said today on a text exchange, I'm in a group text with Cori and some of the others. She said that, she's had the stinging feeling on the outside of her body from tear gas and other gas that's been put on her from peaceful protests. But when she watched, these white supremacists walk into the Capitol, not be apprehended, not be stopped, and then walk out, that she is not only stinging on the outside, but she's stinging on the inside. And she said that's, the feeling that many Black Americans have today. And I agree. And I think that highlights that one of the first things we have to do is, of course, pass again in the House the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and get it passed in the Senate and signed into law, but also recognize some of the underpinnings of this issue, which is institutional racism in our country, and also just a lack of investment and hope in healthcare, jobs, and education in America's communities. And so there's a lot of work to do. But if you were a Black American on Wednesday, you saw a scene very different from what you saw when peaceful protests occurred over a wrongful killing.
Yeah, so true. So just looking at the questions in the chat, the first one that I see, we need to give our intelligence and police agencies better tools against these white nationalist groups. I know it is difficult, but is there any hope that we can pass a domestic terror act?
Yes, the FBI director briefed the Judiciary Committee last year that the greatest threat to our country domestically is white supremacy groups, and I'm all for updating our laws and our resources so we can do all we can to hold them accountable and bring them to justice. But also, it starts in our classrooms to make sure that we are educating our kids about hate and doing all we can at the earliest ages to make sure they don't go down that dark road.
There's a question about whether you think we can impeach Trump by the 19th. And I think you I don't know if you laid out the process, but I've heard that it's expected to be introduced in the House tomorrow and a vote on Tuesday, and could be sent to the Senate as early as Wednesday. And then who knows from there.
That's timing. Right. I believe, we can impeach pretty expeditiously And then, of course, it's on the Senate, and just one senator could delay the impeachment by 2 weeks, which would, of course, take us beyond the 20th. Now, that's not a reason not to do it. We can't just presume to know what they will do. The better question is, do we want to set the precedent of, such a expeditious impeachment, and would that be used against us, say, if the Republicans had the House of Representatives and, Joe Biden didn't say bless you when somebody sneezed, and they would say, well, we're going to impeach him for that. You set the precedent of doing it so fast with Donald Trump. So that's my biggest concern is, setting a precedent around an expeditious impeachment. But I think the situation warrants it, that this is, in exigent circumstances, as they would say in the law, that, the Capitol was attacked and overrun for the first time since the War of 1812, and it was incited by the president. And so we don't have the time, and we have to move at the clip of his corruption and his chaos and the orders that he's giving. And so he's forfeited the right to a lengthier impeachment process.
Yeah, and some people have said if this doesn't warrant impeachment, then nothing does.
Right.
Yeah. So two sort of related questions. What does the Congress have lined up to codify the non-codified norms and expectations that Trump and his appointed officers broke? And also, how do we prevent the next, perhaps more suave and subtle Donald Trump?
Yeah, we're spared. We should be scared by his corruption and his chaos, but we're spared by his incompetence. And there are other people who, could wreak much more havoc on our country. So I'm supporting, and I'm one of the original authors of Adam Schiff's Protect Our Democracy Act, which puts in place a lot of the reforms around the emoluments clause, fast tracking congressional subpoenas in the courts, so we don't have to, allow the president to, really run out the clock against us. It would, tighten the Hatch Act requirements, where the president held the Republican convention literally at the White House. I wouldn't be able to do that anymore. So there's a lot that piece of legislation covers, but I think as this administration goes out of office, we're going to learn so much more, and we're going to have the agility to respond and protect against it.
Yeah, it's going to be a full-time job for a number of people just to keep count of all the things that he's done and that we'll find out that he's done. Let's see, maybe switching gears a little bit. There are several local elected folk in the meeting. What is the best way we can act as local electeds to make a difference?
Yep. And can you say the question again? I was just saying hi to Trish Monroe, who.
Yeah. So what is the best way we can act as local elected officials to make a difference?
Yeah. Well.
Hi, back.
Well, I think there's a lot of work we can do now, knowing that we have a friendly administration on the environment, on gun safety. I really want to be a partner with everyone around infrastructure spending, because the Vice President, President-elect Biden, has a deep interest in investing in infrastructure as a way to climb out of this COVID hole that we've gone into as an economy. And I think our area is suited, because we have such, traffic and congestion needs. We're suited, to be ready for projects that could, address that, like rail, the Valley Link project that goes over the Altamont into San Joaquin County, 50 miles of rail, taking 30,000 cars off the road, cleaner and greener. So there's a lot of projects I'd like to work with you all locally.
I think we lost you for a second.
No, sorry. I'll put in the chat function before I leave my email. So anyone on here, if you have any ideas, please just shoot me an email and let me know how I can help.
Okay. A question here that I'm not sure, Manav Patel, if you want to ask it. The question, have you endorsed Congressman Bowman's bill to create
a what? And Marla, I lost you there.
Yeah, she's frozen. So whose question was that? Can you unmute and ask?
I think it was my question. Yeah, so I think the question, I was asking, so Congressman Jamal Bowman, he introduced a bill to create like an investigative committee on the Capitol. Um, do you have you supported that bill?
Yeah, so it must have been introduced just in the last 2 days. But I mean, yes, absolutely, I support legislation to investigate what happened. Someone asked about Cori Bush's, idea to sanction and expel anyone who was involved. Also, I'm supportive of that. As I said, we must, to use the words of Adam Schiff during the last impeachment trial, this must be a cord of steel that follows these members for all of history. And this is a dark day in our country's history. It was a day where the peaceful transition of power was supposed to happen, and for the first time, not in our lifetime, but the first time in our country's lifetime, we will not have had a peaceful transition of power, and that's a tragedy for our country, and people have to be held accountable.
And next question is, do you believe your fellow Republicans have been radicalized, or do you feel they are just going along with their radicalized base?
I think they've been radicalized, and they are radicalizing others. Certainly, there's a fear that they'll lose their job, and they're putting their jobs ahead of country. But I also see many of them, they've been radicalized by the president, and they're a part of helping the president radicalize others. And this is homegrown terrorism that they have inspired against our country. And our capital is under assault. It's not been assaulted, not in the past tense. It is still under assault. Colleagues of mine who flew home over the weekend when I flew home over the weekend, I had to have security details because of all of the incidents on planes and at the airports by these band of terrorists that the president has inspired.
Kyoko, can you read, or someone else read I can't read the questions in the chat because I relogged in.
So
can I ask, Congressman, how much longer do you have?
I could take one more question if you guys,
okay.
Another one, yeah.
Just a minute. Will you sponsor Congresswoman Bush to remove those senators and representatives in Congress?
Yes, as I was alluding to earlier, I do support.
Okay.
I believe they should resign and be expelled, anyone who's a part of it. And we should understand how much of an inside job this was, because it sure looked like many of these people knew where they were going. They were intending to kill the Speaker of the House, they said, and the Vice President. So,
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Congressman Swalwell, for joining us today, and thank you for your service and for your bravery.
I have my email, so all of you can email me if you have any follow-up.
All right, thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah.